Okay, let's just take a deep breath. Today's episode is going to be deep, and I feel like weird starting it off with a smile because I know, you can see from the title what we're going to be talking about today. We're probably going to be hearing me cry for the first time on Growing and Glowing. We're probably going to be getting very deep. We're going to be getting very personal, I expect. But do you know why I'm happy to start off today's episode? Because I feel like where there is grief, where there is sadness, there has been love. And where there is darkness, we can always insert a little bit of love and a little bit of light. And I feel like even though today's episode is about grief and it is about the very human experience that is loss, as painful as it can be, as with anything that we like to discuss over here on Growing and Glowing, there is certainly some magic to be learned through those testing moments. So let me do formal intros before we get stuck. Hello to you, the lovely person listening. Welcome to Growing and Glowing. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in. Growing and Glowing is our safe space to delve into all things life learnings there may be, from spirituality, love, motherhood, grief, friendship, the list goes on, so much more. But I am here, as always and forever, may I remind you, to provide you with a friend through the very up and down journey that growing and glowing into the very best version of who we truly are can be. So let me just remind you of that. I'm here, okay? If this is your first time tuning in to Growing and Glowing, I love you, I've got you. We're going to get deep today, but we're ready to do it together, right? Let's do this. Hi guys, welcome back. I missed you all over the last week. Do you know what? I'm loving Growing and Glowing so much. I literally want to be one of those podcasts that uploads every day, but I think being days away from, okay, not days, I sound really dramatic when I say that. I'm not going to be giving birth in like 3 days time, guys. Being a few mere weeks away from giving birth, I think I'd probably send myself into overdrive if I was to do that. But I am loving it so much. I just want to sit here and talk to you all day, to be completely honest. And I feel like today's episode is probably going to be quite a long one. We've got a lot to get into. And I just want to say, once again, if you are new here to Growing and Glowing, first of all, welcome. But you might have found me today through, obviously, the title being to do with grief and loss. If you found me through trying to find someone to relate to or to share an experience with alongside whatever is going on in your life right now, I just want to send you the biggest cuddle in the whole wide world. I'm sending you so much love. I really wish, honestly, please feel that from me. I'm really sending you a big squeeze right now. It's okay, honey. We can get through it, okay? There's a lot of shit that can happen in this life. And if you found me today through trying to search for grief or loss or losing your mum, I'm here. Just like I'm here for all of you. But this episode in particular, I would just really want to dedicate to anybody that has gone through grief or loss, which at some point, unfortunately, in our life, will most likely have happened to all of us. I literally always say to Connor, as morbid as it sounds, I hope I die before he does, because I literally physically cannot cope with grief again. Oh, it's a sticky one, isn't it? Why does grief sound so scary? Why is loss so uncomfortable? Well, we're going to get into that all today, guys, and I'm going to be sharing my experience. And as we always do over here on Growing and Glowing, we are going to be joining together, we're going to be rallying together, and making the world a better place by giving everybody the podcast equivalent of a home-baked batch of big chunky chocolate chip cookies and watching Real Housewives. And if that's not your happy place, we can still be friends, because there's lots of other happy places too, but that's just my personal happy place. And if you need a new happy place to try out, I'd recommend starting there. Anyway, before we even get into affirmation of the day today, guys, I actually have something I want to share with you. Now, this isn't specifically related to today's topic of grief, but you know me, I love a quick side story. We love a quick side note, a little diversion of the topic. I actually have... gonna sound... This is the first time I'm ever doing something like this on the podcast. You know what, Elle? It's the divine. Trust it, babe, okay? Listen to me, try to sort myself out. Elle, we don't judge over here, okay? Guys, now, I might sound a little bit like Mystic Meg when I say this, but I have actually a message from the universe for you today. So, hear me out, okay? I was doing my planning and preparing for this episode, which I do every single day leading up to when I record a new episode. And I can't lie, nothing was really coming through apart from the usual that I always get, which is speak to the heart. And I'm talking about these messages kind of just come through to me when I do a little bit of meditation, or I just sit quietly and kind of try to listen to the thoughts that come up in my mind as I'm planning a, pregnancy. That's what happens when I try to talk too quickly and I've got a baby in my womb. When I always do when I'm planning an episode. But yeah, not much was really coming up apart from speak for the heart. So I was like, okay, well that makes me a bit nervous, because I am a planning girly, okay? I do like to sit with my notepad and, go through my favourite books and reference this and reference that. But yeah, like I said, nothing was coming up. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to do some angel card pulls. Now, I got one card that was for me specifically, I feel like, but I actually got 3 cards today that, like I said, aren't very relevant really for the topic, but I feel like if you've tuned in and you've listened to me this far, you need to hear what these cards are that I pulled, because I feel like they're for you, babe. And I just really, really, really want you to take in these cards, okay? You might not... Actually, chances are, if you're here on Growing and Glowing, you might be into that kind of thing. I am. Raise your hand if you're into angel cards. Me. But listen, these are the 3 cards that I pulled out that you need to hear today, okay? So, first of all, they're all very similar. When I tell them to you, you will know what I mean. They're all very similar, okay? So, first of all, leap. You go first, the universe will catch you. Right? Number 2, warrior woman. If you weren't afraid, what would you do? Number 3, yes. Just say yes. So whoever's listening to this right now, you need to hear from the universe, downloaded by hot off the press by your gal, Mrs. Swift over here. You're just really being called to do... I'm reminding myself one of those TikTokers right now as I shift through these cards. You're really being called to just face your fears and do it anyway. Can I just say, often, the things that are provoking the most fear in us, the things that seem the scariest, on the other side of those are where our greatest gifts from the universe lie, okay? So, if you weren't afraid, what would you do? If there was no judgment in this world, what would you do? If there could be failure wasn't a thing, what would you do with this life? So that idea that you've been having, that thing that keeps popping into your mind at the moment, that thing that just feels like a really good idea, do it, please. Please, because your best life is waiting on the other side. Yes, 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 yes is the explanation of that yes card. Just do it, okay? So I don't know who needed to hear that. Hopefully that serves some of you in some way. I don't know if I've just ended up telling the Einstein of our generation to start that science lab, or, the creator of the most stunning cookie recipe in the world has just listened to that. Well, she doesn't know it yet, but she's just listened to that and she's going to create them. and then the whole world's vibration is going to be lifted through that cookie recipe. You don't know. I just felt like someone needed to hear that today. So anyway, take with that what you will. But let's get into today's official affirmation of the day, which I really wanted to do something that applies to everybody today, but I also wanted it to really sit with the people who are listening to this in their grief right now. So let's just take a moment. Let's put our hand on our heart. Let's release our shoulders. I'm actually going to do a little bit of stretching of my neck today because that's what feels good right now. But I just want you to take this moment for yourself and just really own it wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Let's do a deep breath in and out. Repeat after me. Today I choose love and I choose to heal. Today I choose love and I choose to heal. I'm not going to go into that too much, but just know that you deserve love and you deserve to heal through the things that have hurt you. But only you can choose that for yourself, okay? Just your big sis reminder right now. I choose love and I choose to heal. You deserve it. So, next up, of course, we have our famous highlight reel that ends up being about 20 minutes. Actually, today I'm going to keep it very, very short and sweet because I don't actually have 3 things to share. I guess I could if I really wanted to, but one of them would have to be the white chocolate cream eggs. I feel like they're very self-explanatory, babe. I don't really need to divulge much info on them. They're great. And sure, if you want to add that to today's highlight reel to make it 3 things, go for it. But my highlight reel today is very short and sweet. The first thing actually is journaling. Now, I've never been much of a journaler until I lost my mum. I don't actually think I'd ever journaled a day in my life. I kept diaries, sure, when I was like 7. But yeah, journaling I wasn't really into very much. And then the day after my mum died, I did my first like diary entry / journaling as an adult. And I actually read back my first ever journal entry last night in kind of preparation for this podcast episode, because it was when like I said, it was the day after I lost my mum. So I kind of wanted to take myself back to that time in my mind and remind myself how I was feeling and the emotions that were coming through. And it's just, I found a very loving and interesting way in how to like keep that kind of connection between who you are today versus what you've been through. Because even though when you write these journal entries, it's like, I don't ever want to read this back, probably. Should you ever find yourself in the position 3 years down the line in an entirely new place and position in life, and you do want to take yourself back there, actually, it's a really lovely reminder of how far you've come. And I just think it's one of those, hello, my sweet heck. Someone's come for a cuddle. Do you mind? This is you actually. Everyone can hear your tail wagging and your nose. Hecky, have you got anything you want? What's your highlight reel, Heck? Gosh, I'm causing a ruckus in here now. Hecky. Yeah, sorry. So journaling. That's number 1 on the highlight reel. Really good way to just reflect on what you're actually feeling, because you'd be so surprised at what comes up if you write it down. And just take 5 minutes to really gather your thoughts and express it somewhere. And then number 2, meditation actually has made a big return back into my life. Sometimes I go for like weeks really without sitting there, and I've been finding it, in all honesty, quite hard as of recent, because I am so pregnant now. This babe is constantly wriggling around my tummy, and any position I sit in is not particularly comfortable. So trying to like get into a deep relaxation when heavily pregnant, I actually find it quite tricky. But I've kind of like taken a new stance on my meditation at the end of pregnancy, because it's something I do need to do to make me feel connected and grounded. So I have wanted to find ways to reincorporate it back into my life, even when my physical body is kind of uncomfortable. So I've literally been meditating, babe, when I've been waiting for my toast, as we discussed in last week's highlight reel. My Nutella on toast, getting me through my life right now. I've been just taking a few deep breaths and really zoning in to the universe as I've been waiting for my toast to pop up, babe, which takes 90 seconds. I've been doing it in the shower. I've been doing it just before I fall asleep at night time. So I just want to remind you, if you're not really into meditation, if you don't want to sit there for like 20 minutes, half an hour and really zone into the universe and like download all of this info from your spirit guides and blah blah blah, you don't have to. Meditation can just literally be deep breaths and trying to clear your mind. And I just think that's important to just stop us feeling so overwhelmed, because we take in so much information all the time, every second, every day. Let's just give ourselves that moment of being calm. So yeah, that's my little highlight reel of today's episode. Short and sweet, but actually two really important things, I think, in becoming better. Don't underestimate those small things that you can do. Don't underestimate that little bit of time for yourself in doing things like journaling and meditating. They're very, very easy to put off as we get stuck into the swing of everyday life, but they're key, I think, those little habits, into becoming the best version of yourself. Anyway, let's get stuck in to today's episode. So, if you are listening to this episode the day it goes live, it will have been Mother's Day here in the UK just yesterday, and I hope you all had a lovely one, however you spent it, whoever you spent it with. Mother's Day is a day just to remember love and the women in our life. Actually, of course, predominantly mothers, but also I just think it's just another great day to celebrate girls, isn't it? To be honest with you, because I know for a fact that it certainly wasn't just my mum that raised me in this life. It's been a handful of women. It's been a village of women. So whoever you spent it with and whoever you kind of paid tribute to yesterday, I hope that it was a day full of love and light for you. Mother's Day for me will always be slightly... God, here we go. I can feel the emotion rising already. Mother's Day for me will always be slightly overwhelming, I guess, because if you guys have stuck around for my journey on YouTube over the last few years, you will probably be aware of the fact that my mum died on Mother's Day in 2020. So Mother's Day will always have a bit of a tinge of sadness, I suppose. But like I said, where there is sadness, where there is grief, where there is darkness, there's always room for a little bit of an injection of love and light. And I just want to literally just jump straight in and just go with saying straight away, this is my third Mother's Day without my mum now. And it gets better. I just want to say that. It gets better. I am nowhere near coming to a conclusion of my journey with grief. In fact, I'm still very early with it. In fact, there is never a conclusion of a journey with grief, because grief is forever a wound that there is no fixing. There is no healing for the grief. The success of dealing with grief, in my opinion, is becoming aware of the life that you're choosing to live with your grief and trying to do that and deal with that in the most loving, accepting, non-judgmental way possible to you. Grief is the price we pay for love. If we have loved, if we have felt human connection, which I bloody hope every single person listening right now has at some point, because that is literally what gets us through life, is human connection, it is love. As a very unfortunate side note of that, there is grief on the other end. And I think we have it all mixed up. Even I have had it mixed up since I've lost my mum, with this idea of grief has an end. Grief can come to a conclusion. Acceptance of grief is the end of it. No, it's not. Like I said, I think personally, for me, what I found is feeling like I've gotten one over on my grief, or like I've succeeded in my journey with grief for my mum, is learning to coexist. And I remember when my mum first died, that phrase to me that you'd hear everybody saying, you just learn to live with it. Grief is like something you just learn to live with. It sounded, excuse my French, and no, I'm not going to swear, Ellie, because we don't need to. I'm just going to use the word absolutely. But you can imagine what word I would have inserted there. Exhausting. That sounded absolutely exhausting to me. Learning to coexist and just deal with this emotion that feels so unbearably painful. Like, I've gone through childbirth, okay? Grief can feel harder than childbirth. Imagine like the most intense physical pain you've ever felt. Grief. And trying to like flow the energy of love that you have for someone that is no longer physically with you anymore is more intense than the most intense physical pain you've ever felt in your life. It just is. Like, it's so overwhelming, it's so extreme, it's so powerful. And I remember when my mum first died, and I was really like in the very, early days of learning how to grieve, and I'd hear people saying, yeah, you just learn to deal with it, and it's always there, but you just learn to kind of like live with it. It's like, what? Sorry, I actually don't want to do that. I remember actually thinking that. I'd rather not. I'd actually just rather not do that. Is that an option? Because I can't do this. I'm not going through the rest of my life trying to exhaustingly process this incredibly painful and horrible and dark emotion forever. Sorry, that's not for me, babe. And yes, it does sound exhausting. It does sound tiring when you are in those waves of grief. It is exhausting thinking, oh my God, do I really have to deal with this forever? When you are in that wave of grief. But when you come out of that wave of grief, you realise there are two sides to the coin, and there are two sides to grieving, and one very heavy side is all of that big emotion. It is all of that pain. But the other side to the coin of grief is life and love, and realising that you still have so much of that left to give, and how the person that you're grieving would want you to do that. Although grief is a universal thing, and like I said, most of the time it's something every single one of us will experience at some point in our lifetime, the way that grief can find us varies so widely. And my story is with cancer. So I lost my mum to cancer. She had a 5.5-year battle with a brain tumour. She was diagnosed when I was 18. She died when I just turned 24 years old. So although I'm going to share a little bit about my story, I am going to try and keep this podcast episode more to my findings through grief and my lessons that I've learned through it, as opposed to really delving into my story, because I've done that online before, and I did actually end up filming 2 very in-depth videos about my mum's journey with her cancer and the whole kind of story behind it specifically on my YouTube channel. I did one 6 weeks after she died and one 1 year after she died. So if you find yourself kind of wondering a little bit more about my story, or you find yourself in those time periods in your grief, you know, like a few weeks after you've lost someone and then a year after you've lost someone, I will leave the links to those videos below in the show notes. And actually, isn't it funny, because I watched back one of those videos this morning, kind of just to see, you know, what I'd already discussed online. And it's so funny, isn't it? Like, what our minds can block out. Like, I'm only 3 years on, but watching the video back where I sat down 6 weeks after my mum had died and I was, you know, really going into a lot of detail about quite a lot of the story with it, it was so interesting to me how so much of that I was like, oh my God, I'd forgotten about that. Or, oh yeah, no, I was like transitioned straight back into that moment in time when otherwise I think I'd actually completely shut it out, and I'm only 3 years on. And I wrote a list, like a thing in my notes 24 hours after she'd passed, and I remember writing in there, like, I am petrified to forget these small details. And it was like details about what she looked like as she was dying, and my very specific emotions through the 10 days leading up to her dying, when she was kind of in like this coma, not unconscious but very not aware state. And I remember being petrified that I would actually get to the point that I am at today, where so many of those small details don't come into my mind now. And I don't know if that actually, being here where I am today, provides me with the sadness or the fear that I had at the time I wrote them down, because I was scared I was going to forget, or actually if it provides me with comfort that I've moved on in a lot of senses. And even though grief is something we don't move on from, but it's like a benchmark as to the progress that my grief has made, is that I don't sit and think about those things, like her cold, blotchy legs and feet as she was hours away from dying, like I once kind of obsessed over, what if I forget? Because if I forget that, then that means that I forget her, and that means that that whole chapter of my life with my mum in it is gone from my memory forever. And it's like, no. Actually, what grief teaches me is that grief is not about remembering those details that haunt you forever. Grief is not about torturing yourself to think about those traumatic experiences that you dealt with in the lead up to death, or whatever your story is with losing someone you love, the traumatic things that surrounded the death. Like, that's not what grief is. And if you forget and stop thinking about those things, that's not a sign of forgetting the person that you love. And I know I sound like a broken record when I come back to that in almost every single topic we discuss over here on Growing and Glowing, but in my opinion, self-awareness is literally the key to being the best version of who you are and dealing with things in the best possible way you can with what knowledge you have at that moment in time. To me, grief is channeling the love that you have for the person that is no longer physically here with us in a way that honours you as well. I've had quite a time with doing that, to be really honest with you, because the emotions that have popped up for me during the last 3 years that I've been grieving and mourning the loss of my mum, it's not been rainbows and butterflies with like just love that I had for her. My mum and I, we actually had quite a rocky relationship for a lot of years. And that is something that I've never, ever said online, because I've not really felt like it's relevant. It's not something I'm interested in when it comes to kind of, you know, airing dirty laundry. It's just not felt productive. But I feel like in this discussion, I think it's important to note that grief doesn't just include the love. Grief also includes processing the other emotions that come up for that person too. And in my case in particular, there was anger, sadness, abandonment, pain that I've had to process when she's not been here. So it's kind of like, you know, not just to the fact that I've lost her and I'm mourning her, but also to things that happened between us years ago, years before she died, years before she was even poorly. Emotions that I'm coming to terms with and situations that I'm processing now as an adult, as a mother myself, wondering and trying to come at it from a place of least judgment as possible, but wondering why she chose to do things she did as a mum when I'm now a mum myself and wouldn't put my own kids through that, even if it caused me a great amount of pain not to. So grief for me has not been straightforward, because it's also been having to process all of these emotions that actually are directed at her, as well as obviously the obvious emotion of grief, of loss and sadness, and the guilt that can come with those other emotions cropping up when it's about someone that isn't here any longer to defend themselves, or you're not able to have that conversation with them. So that's where therapy's really helped me, because this energy that lives inside us of these emotions, it has to go somewhere. And if it can't go to the person that is no longer here, it has to come out in some other way. So that's where I've personally found therapy very useful. But my mum and I didn't have a straightforward relationship. And although she's still my mum and I still love her, with every ounce of my being, it's still hard. Like, this relationship between us kind of being continued from my end with nowhere to go. Whether it's emotions in our relationship built with love or built with, you know, that little bit of anger and my wanting to question her on some things now that I'm an adult woman, mother myself. I can't lie, I think if I was to pinpoint exactly where I'm at in my grief right now, I do think I'm like very heavily in a state of denial. When I write on paper what I've done since my mum died, I have got engaged. I was engaged to my now husband 5 months after she died. Then we fell pregnant 2 months after that with our first baby. And like, even that in itself, like, I was actually at such early stages in my grief and didn't even realise. Then of course I had the pregnancy. Then I gave birth. This whole time, I think, throwing myself into my work and like my YouTube videos and keeping myself really, really busy, you know, to have done so much in between all of that and now be pregnant and nearly giving birth to my second child. I actually went to go and visit my mum's. We didn't bury her in a cemetery with a grave or anything like that. There's a natural burial woods near where she lived. I decided to put her there instead, because if you know the story of my mum, you'll know that we weren't allowed to talk about it. We weren't allowed to talk about our cancer. We weren't allowed to talk about the fact that she was dying. She didn't want to know anything. She didn't go to hospital appointments. She didn't want to have scan results. To the point where conversations like where she was going to be buried and her funeral and things like that were non-existent. They were down to me. And I mean, gosh, like, this is turning into a therapy session 101, but I felt more alone than that and making those decisions than I've ever felt in my grief, because it was like trying to think about what this person wants who is still very much alive in front of you but also dying right before your eyes, and having to think about these choices that they would want to have, but they're not giving you any lead. And also I didn't feel like I had anybody to talk to about it, because even though I do have my younger sister Katie that I'm sure a lot of you know from my vlogs. Like, my way of dealing with my grief and Katie's way of dealing with her grief are so very different. They are on polar opposites of the scale. And also I kind of have this like thing towards Katie, as I'm sure many of you have gathered through my videos, that is like a very maternal feeling, and I kind of didn't really want to put any of these decisions on her, or feel like I feel like I could really talk to her about any of it. So I did feel very alone with it, and I just want to say shout out to anybody else that has been in that position, because trying to make those decisions when you feel entirely on your own and you've not really got anybody to like connect with over or share that responsibility with is so hard. That's like I remember that being like one of the hardest things about loss, was like trying to step into this position of making all of these decisions that didn't feel like they were my decisions to make, but nobody else was stepping up to the plate to do it. So it was really hard, and so I decided to go with a natural burial wood because that's what felt right for my mum. And I actually visited there yesterday with Connor and with Zane and my 2 dogs, and obviously I'm heavily pregnant with my second child, and there was a part of it that broke my heart. Obviously, then putting aside the like I'm going here to grieve for my mum, it was like this sudden realisation of actually how much has changed in my life since I lost her 3 years ago. Like the fact that I'm about to bring my second child into the world, like all of the stuff that I've been through since I lost her, like the change in the person I feel like I am since I last had a conversation with her. And that was a hard moment. Like sitting there and realising just how much progress my life has made when she's not been here to see it. That was a hard moment. It was another hard moment in my grief journey. And one that I don't think I'd really had since I lost her, because for so long after I lost her, she died a day before we went into the first lockdown in the UK for coronavirus. So it felt like almost half of my journey with my grief so far, like the first 2 years, a year and a half to 2 years after I lost her, was really, the world was frozen anyway. Do you know what I mean? Like nobody was really doing much with their life anyway. So I didn't really have that feeling for that time. But when I went to go and see her memorial tree yesterday where she's buried, it was like, I've done all of this. I've literally birthed nearly 2 people. 2 of your grandchildren, your first grandchild, your second grandchild, have come into this world in the last 3 years that you've not been here, and I'm married, and like I hadn't had to deal with that bit of my grief yet, which is like almost feeling so far away from where I was when she left. So that was a new part of grief to deal with. And this is the thing with grief. Like I said, grief goes on for the rest of your life, and I'm not a pro. I only have 3 years experience under my belt right now. When I sit here with 30 years experience, I'm sure I'll have a lot more lessons and a lot more learnings on it to speak about and to share with you. But I don't have, and I don't believe there is such thing as a guide on how to get through it. I just don't think that exists. I think that's pretty impossible because everybody deals with it so differently. And I'm such a planner person. Like when she died, I remember on day one being desperate for some sort of like manual on how to get through it. Like, this is what you do on day one, this is what you do in the first hour, this is what you do with the first time you eat Rice Krispies after you have lost the person you love. Like, this is how you get through the rest of your life. I wanted a step-by-step guide, and there isn't. All there is accepting the reality of what is and making peace with this idea in our mind of what we deserved and what we should have had. Because I found that is what is the real killer. That is what drags me down into like victim mentality, victim mode, when I sit there and think about, it's so unfair that this happened. It's so unfair that I lost my mum at 24. the jealousy that pangs inside when I see someone else having a baby shower with their mum, having like done all of it for them, or they've gone wedding dress shopping with their mum, or my friends like saying that their mum is going round for dinner, or I don't know, whatever, anything with a mum involved. I have to really take a moment and step back and almost like gentle parent my own inner child that is like freaking out, because in those moments it is so easy to think, this isn't fair, life's not fair. But I found no comfort in thinking like that. I found actually personally for me, that's actually pretty self-destructive to think like that. I don't manage to get anything done when I'm feeling like that. It doesn't sit in love is what I'm trying to say. Sitting there and thinking about how unfair it is that you've had to be the one to go through the grief. You've had to be the one to deal with that loss. There's not really any love in that emotion. That is just harbouring negative energy in your energy body. And if you're also then going to choose not to release that negative energy in some way, that is where grief can become a very, very dangerous thing, because it's not being processed. And it's just building on negative experience of grief after negative experience of grief. And then that becomes your life. And that is where people get so swallowed into their grief. I just found personally I've been so much better at living a happier life and coping with my grief when I don't sit in that victim mentality. Although it is hard, and although it feels sometimes like that is the only way through it, is sitting there and thinking, woe is me, poor me, I'm so sad, I've lost my mum, I don't have this, this and this, and it's so unfair that all my friends, my sisters, blah, 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 get to do that. But it is my reality that I lost my mum. Do you know what I mean? And it's not denial. That's not denial. Denial isn't choosing to step outside of victim mentality. That's not what denial is. Denial, I think, that has been showing up in my journey with grief is being very aware and feeling those negative energies come up, feeling tears arise whenever I see a picture of my mum or listen to a certain Mamma Mia song or whatever. Like, denial is where I can feel it bubbling and I choose not to go there because I can't be bothered to deal with the sad emotion because it's going to be painful. And I think being really honest and being really open, that's where I am in my journey right now, because I can feel the emotion coming up inside me for Mother's Day this weekend, and it's like a wall goes up around my heart already. And I'm just being honest, like, denial for me is very real right now. But there are different stages to grief, and acceptance of grief, even though it feels like a great place to get to when you feel it, is not the end of it, because there are always going to be new life situations, new experiences that you go through that are going to trigger all of those different stages within the grief process once again. So you might feel like you've accepted it. I know that I definitely feel as if I've accepted it at points. Most of the time I feel like I've accepted it. But then it's something like going to visit my mum's tree and being made to feel very aware of how much my life has changed since she died, that then triggers me into a separate part in the grief process. And then it's just going through the motions all over again. One thing that can be a real struggle for a lot of us in dealing with grief is this whole idea of moving on and living your life and continuing to be happy. I remember when my mum first died and I wrote down I don't know if it was in my notes or in a journal, feeling like I could be happy again without her being around felt like it was light years away. I did not know how to do that. I didn't know how to carry on living life. And when I started to, and sometimes even still to this day, I get an immense moment of guilt for carrying on and for being happy when she can't, like she's not here to do that, which actually it's something that we all feel so heavily if we're in a moment of grief, but it's the most ridiculous thing, don't you think? If you're grieving someone that much where you feel guilty to the point of living being a bad thing, then that means that you must have loved them a hell of a lot, and that they probably loved you a hell of a lot too. But when you love someone that much, imagine if the shoe was on the other foot. Imagine if it was you that wasn't here anymore. Would you want them to feel guilty for living a life? Absolutely not. In fact, I have a really, really comforting little poem that I want to just read the last little bit of from a book called I Wish I Knew by Donna Ashworth. And it's called The Thing About Grief. And it's literally just this small verse of 5 lines. Grief may feel like the dying of the soul while the body still lives. But you are alive, my friend, and they are not. And they do not want you to be with them yet. They very much want you to live. And I had a moment like this really not that long ago. I think it was literally 2 weekends ago. Because as I have said, my grief is very up and down right now. I know that Mother's Day is coming up. It's her anniversary. Not only is it her literal anniversary, but it's also Mother's Day. So it's almost like a 2 birds in 1 stone kind of thing. Anyway, I had my baby shower a couple of weekends ago. And for the longest time leading up to it, I didn't even want to do anything to like celebrate my beautiful son coming into the world. Like, what? Because of my grief. Because I had guilt of living. And this is 3 years on. And these moments are rarer than they were before when I first lost her. But sometimes they do still pop up. And in those moments, it's remembering the love that you had for that person and the love that they had for you. And that they don't want you to just be living this miserable life where you constantly think about them and are sad about the loss, and you bound your life and everything it could be to that. They want you to live your life. They want you to carry on. And I think actually we sometimes misplace the word guilt, because I don't think it's always guilt. I think it's actually judgment for self about how we're coping with our grief. It's judgment for ourselves for the fact that we're continuing to live and they aren't. And the way that we are grieving by what we've learnt from society is wrong. Because you think about grieving, you think about, okay, grief means the year after you lose someone, you're just sad every day, and then all of a sudden you just snap out of it. And then if you haven't done that, there's something probably a bit wrong with you, and you haven't really processed it how you should. And that is the biggest load of rubbish I've ever heard in my life. Like I said, grief is a very, very, very lifelong process, but I think the key to it is being able to be self-aware enough to notice where you are, and then bringing love and light to where you are at that point in your grieving process. If that means you are at a place where you're judging yourself for living your life, for having a baby shower, then it's coming to the realisation that it's not the person you lost that wouldn't want you to have the baby shower. That's your judgment that you're having for yourself because you love them so much that you wouldn't ever want to give them the wrong impression that you're continuing to be happy without them. When in actuality, it's your right to be happy. You're still alive. You're still here. You still have your life to live. You still have happy days to come through to you. You still have people to meet that are going to end up being one of the biggest loves in your life. You're still going to have laughter, have happiness, have joy. And you are so deserving of all of those things. The rubbish things that happen to us in life, the way to get over it just always boils down to the same thing, don't you think? It always boils down to love. How can we show love through this situation? What do we need? Grief, in my opinion, is only successfully owned when you're constantly showing yourself awareness of where you are in that process and then showing unconditional love to that part of the process. And that's something for me that I have struggled with, because unconditional love comes from your mum. That's why you're taught it. But I lost my mum. So that unconditional love that I guess I should be getting from her, I've had to teach myself to give to myself. And that's become a hell of a lot easier since having a child of my own, because having a child of my own, as we discussed in the last episode, has really taught me what that is. It's really taught me what unconditional love is, what judgment is. But having to apply that to ourselves in our darkest, deepest moments is so important. Even though it feels impossible, it is so important. And sometimes I think that unconditional love does mean pushing yourself out of your comfort zone a little. I know that for me, unconditional love is if I can feel grief bubbling away inside of me and it's just up to my neck, just up to my mouth, then it's coming up to the top of my ears and it's about to burst outside of my head and I'm just covered in grief. I know that the unconditional love that I need to give myself is going and sitting and thinking about my mum instead of avoiding it, like I usually do, to be honest with you, because like I said, I think I'm at a bit of a stage in denial right now. I don't know if it's the pregnancy hormones, I don't know if it's like I'm trying to focus so heavily on bringing another life into this world and trying to keep myself so high because of that, because I want to be the best for my kids, that I'm almost like doing myself error by pushing away the negative emotion that is coming through, because really sometimes it just needs that one little outburst and then it's okay for a while again. And I think that outburst could have happened yesterday when I took everybody, my son and Connor and everyone, to the memorial tree. It could have happened then, and it did for a bit, but it was like so painful that I shut the door on it pretty quickly. So I know that it's still there and I know that it still needs to pop up. But the unconditional love is doing that. The unconditional love is not running away from that emotion, even though that is what feels most comfortable. And at the same time, if we're going to flip that, if you are feeling in a really low spot with your grief and all you can do is sit on the sofa and you can't even bear to think about going outside or getting a little bit of fresh air on your face because doing that would just hurt too much, it's showing yourself the unconditional love to honour the fact that you are here. They might not be, but you're still deserving of that fresh air. You're still deserving of love. You're still deserving of the life that you have been blessed to be given. At the same time, this is all a very, very personal journey. And we simply cannot judge someone else's way of grieving because it's not the same as our own. I don't think in the whole circle that my mum has of people grieving her loss, I don't think there's one pair of us that are grieving the same. Everybody is grieving ever so slightly differently. And it has been painful because there have been people in that circle that have been grieving for my mum that have absolutely judged the way that I've been grieving. And I can tell you, that's a horrible feeling. That adds like 10 times more to my grief. You know, I'm just going to keep it open and be really honest here. A whole nother layer to this conversation that I'm not going to get into because I don't feel like it's particularly relevant, but I will touch on it because I feel like I can't be the only person that has gone through it. Grief is so much more than just losing that person. Grief then totally and utterly can shatter and completely change forever your relationship with other people involved in that scenario because of the expectations that people hold on one another for behaving in a certain way, grieving in a certain way. We hold judgment for the way that they do it, and if they don't do it in the way that we see them fit to be doing it, then they're doing it wrong. That's not love, that's just pain. That's just judgment, that's just hatred. In a situation that is already so tormenting, do not judge someone else's way of grieving, someone else's way of dealing with it, to be right or wrong. Because there is no right or wrong. All we can keep doing every single time, in any situation, in anything to do with grief or life, is love and light. Bringing love, bringing light to every situation we can possibly be in. And judgment is not included in love or light. Whenever I speak about grief, one of the most popular questions I'm always asked is, how can I help my significant other through this? How can I help my so-and-so through this, whoever the relationship is to you? And that would honestly be one of my biggest tips, is not judgment. Absolutely not judgment. We just cannot judge or hold space for preconceptions about how we would have done things differently or the way we would cope with it if we haven't walked a mile in that person's shoes. I think communication is really important, just being very open and very honest. Look, I want nothing more in this world than to help you and show you love through this situation that you are facing right now. How best can I serve you? How can the relationship you and I have be at its best right now? Let me show up for you. Let me be there for you. What is it that you need me to do? And I think it does take, once again, self-awareness from the other person in order to be able to give you the best answer to that. I know there have been situations before where sometimes all I want to do is cry and talk about my mum because of something I've seen on TV. We're in the middle of watching a programme and it triggers back a memory of mine. And I can totally understand. I sit here and laugh. It's not funny, but I can totally understand how confusing that would be to Connor when the exact same thing could happen a week later. And I just want to turn the programme off and go in a different room and not talk about it. Because last week I did the exact opposite thing. So I think it's like about being really self-aware with where you are in your processing grief and being honest about that to the people that love you, who are trying to help and support you. So I know this is very niche, this next part of the convo, but I just want to touch on it for anybody that is in the same boat as me this Mother's Day, of being a motherless daughter or a motherless son. Trust me, honey, I've been there, okay? This is not my first Mother's Day without my mum. Mother's Day, as I've mentioned, is also the anniversary of my mum's death, which actually I just want to do a huge shout out to the lovely, incredibly beautiful, sweet, kind, wonderful soul that reached out to me on Instagram DM when I spoke about this on there the other day a little bit. She really helped me see the love and the positive in the situation of the fact that my mum died on Mother's Day, which was really hard to see up until that point, to be totally honest with you. Like, because my mum was in this like state where she could have died for 10 days. And the doctors told us that usually the people that are in that kind of state don't make it any longer than a week. But my mum went on for 10 days and then she died on the 10th day, which happened to be Mother's Day 2020. And this sweet soul that DM'd me said, what if your mum chose that day to die because she knew that it was the only day where you would be able to be provided with a little bit more love and a little bit more light and a little bit more comfort and happiness on that day when you have children of your own. And it's so true. There's not another day in all of the 365 days there is that she could have died in the year where there could be just a slither of a chance that I could feel better on that day through being celebrated as a mother myself. Any other day of the year, it would just be rubbish because I would just be sitting thinking about her. But she chose a day to die where I also get to be celebrated as a mum myself through my own children, and that brings love and light to the day that she died. That might seem like a bit of a reach to some people, but I want to use it as an example to you. And again, a huge thank you to the sweet, sweet person that messaged me that, because that really reminded me to see the beauty in everything. Like, God, did I ever think I'd be able to see the beauty in the day that my mum died? No. But I just want it to be a bit of a thought trigger for you guys. What's the positive you can take through this lesson of grief? What is something here that you can flip and switch and turn it into love? Because there will be something. It might seem like the hardest thing in the world to find, and it might have to have like the light and the energy of the sun to be poured onto it for you to be able to notice it and see it, but there will be something there, even if it's just the personal growth that you experience through it. The personal growth that losing my mum has given me is a lesson that, yes, of course I wish I didn't have to experience, but it's happened, and here I am trying to make the best out of it, and it really has taught me so much. if anything, it's taught me that my time on here on earth is short, and you don't know, not to sound morbid, but you don't know how long you have. I'm sure my mum did not think that she would have 24 short years with me and 21 short years with Katie. If you ask me today, how long do you think you're going to be around for Saint's life? I would say, well, I hope forever, because you do. Even the idea of leaving Saint when he's like a 70-year-old man, like, kills me inside. But you just do think that you're going to be here forever. But that's just not the reality, and that's what losing someone teaches you. And that just makes everything so much more meaningful. Everything is done with more love, more passion, more oomph, just more. Because you know what it is to not have it anymore. And so I just want to say to those motherless daughters out there this Mother's Day, what would your mum want you to do today? How would your mum want you to spend Mother's Day? From a mum, myself now, I can guarantee you, she would not want you to sit around crying all day. If that's what you need to do, if that's what you need to do to honour your feelings, if that's what your grief is telling you need to do, then you absolutely do that. But your mum would want you to live this beautiful life that she gave you. She'd want you to go out and experience all of the things that life has to offer you. She'd want you to own it. She'd want you to own it with happiness and joy and friendship and laughter. And if you're in a position like me where you are a motherless daughter but you have babies, you have your children, your mum would absolutely want you to go and celebrate that and the woman that you've become since she departed. So just remember that. Your mum, your dad, your sibling, your baby, whoever it is that you've lost, they love you so much and they want you to be here and they want you to be happy. Shivers as I say that. Go and live the beautiful life that you've been blessed with. Wow. I have been sitting here recording for so long, I feel like I need Connor to make me the biggest cup of tea. I need the biggest pack of chocolate digestives, babe. I need 5 slices of Nutella on toast. Oh my lord, that was cathartic, that was emotional, that was deep. At the same time, I feel like I didn't even touch the surface, and this is why I'm so honoured to have a space like Growing and Glowing, because this is the first conversation of many, guys. You have any requests for me about what you want me to do episodes on? You want me to jump a little bit deeper into a specific part of a conversation? Just pop me a message. I promise I try my absolute hardest to read every single message on Growing and Glowing. And of course my personal Instagram and stuff as well. Feedback is always appreciated and always taken on board. And yeah, honestly, like, I feel like grief, all of these topics, motherhood, everything, is such a big conversation, and there's so much I want to say on it. If there's something specifically you want me to talk about, please just let me know. I am going to love and leave you today with my Growing and Glowing moments of the week, and as usual, I want you to think and take a moment for yourself of what your own Growing and Glowing moments are of the week. My growing moment this week, I think, is actually going to see my mum's memorial tree, because I'm just going to be really open and really honest right now and really share some vulnerability. I have not felt ready to go and see it since the day that we buried her there, which was last September, and it's now March. I just haven't been, and I felt shame around that. You know, when there have been family members that have asked to meet me there or go there, I just have not felt okay enough to go. I felt really scared of the grief that it's going to trigger in me. But now I've been, and I actually did it, I think, in the best way I could have done it, with Connor and Saint and my dogs and the baby in my womb right now, although it was like really hard for me to go there instead of where I wanted to go in my mind, which was to her house for a roast dinner because it was a Sunday, like, it was also still such a wonderfully beautiful experience, and it was definitely a growing moment for me because it was just fucking really hard to go and stand there at my mum's memorial tree with my toddler running around, dreaming of the relationship they would have had in another lifetime, you know? But I did it, and now it feels as though a plaster has been ripped off and that first step has been taken, and now I'm actually really looking forward to going again. Now it feels like it's a much easier, more accessible place for me to go because I've been there and done it, and I've realised that it's not as big and scary as it seems going to visit. And even if it does invoke a lot of emotion, a lot of grief for me to come up in that moment, then that's okay. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? I cry and feel the pain. But then I also feel the fresh air on my cheeks. And I also hear the birds tweeting, and I also see someone walking their dog through the field. And in the summer, we can take picnic blankets there. And, you know, I have a lot of plans of things I want to plant around it. And it's a beautiful, beautiful space. So that was my growing moment, was going to visit my mum's grave, I guess you could call it. My glowing moment of the week, I've actually been really good at putting myself to bed early the last few nights. Wow, I sound like an old pregnant woman when I say that, don't I? But it's my reality. I've been literally tucking myself up at like 8:30, 9 o'clock every single night, and I am so thankful for myself every single morning when we wake up at like 6, 7 a.m. I really make sure that like my bedtime the last few nights has been a bit of a ritual, to be honest with you. I spray my lovely spray that I like to spray. I might do a little bit of meditation. I always read my book. I try to read like 10 pages of my book every single night. I'm currently reading Spare by Prince Harry, which I'm loving, by the way. I know that their whole situation and whatever is, people have mixed opinions on it, but I am loving the book. It's very eye-opening. I love the way he has written it, and there's something about it, I don't know why, but there's something about it that actually feels quite nostalgic to me. So I'd recommend that book if you're looking for a new book to read. There's just something that feels really nice about, like, you know, getting tucked up into fresh bed sheets and fresh pyjamas, and your legs are shaved and they're moisturised, and you're reading your book and you're eating a little bit of choc. I always take a little bit of chocolate up with me. Yeah, so that's been my glowing moment, has been like taking care of myself in these last few weeks of pregnancy. And it's something that I know I need to do a little bit more of, which, you know, a bedtime is a small place to start, babe, but it's a good place to start. So let the pregnancy massages commence, babe, because now I've got my bedtime rituals underway. I'm ready to go full on with my self-care routine. Anyway, I'm going to love you and leave you. I hope that this episode managed to serve you in some way, even if you are not grieving or going through the process of loss right now. But I want you to know that if you are, you can get through this. I didn't think I would be here 3 years on talking about my experience with grief, but here I am, and I have almost 2 beautiful children to thank for that journey and life's twists and turns. And just even when life, you know, you're really in the trenches of it and you're feeling like, what is the reason for this? Why do I deserve this to happen? Just please remember there is love and there is light at the end of it. And I promise you that you can get through it. And I'm sending you the biggest cuddle in the world. And I really, really, really hope you go on to have the most wonderful week. Thank you so much for listening, guys. I love you dearly. And I will see you in the next episode. Bye.